Friday, known as Jumu'ah in Islam, is a day unlike any other in the week. While every day carries its own importance, Friday is uniquely distinguished as a day of spiritual reflection, collective worship, and divine mercy. The Quran refers to Friday as a blessed day, a time for believers to step away from the mundane routines of daily life and turn their hearts toward Allah. In the Prophet Muhammad's teachings, Friday is described as the leader of all days, a day of gathering, a day of increased reward, and a day when prayers are answered. For Muslims, it is a weekly reminder of the ultimate purpose of life, to worship Allah, to seek His guidance, and to purify the soul from worldly distractions. The significance of Friday begins with the congregational prayer, the Jumu'ah Salah, which is performed in place of the regular Duhur prayer. Unlike other prayers, Jumu'ah brings the community together in a shared expression of faith. Men are encouraged to attend the mosque, listen to the khutbah, the sermon delivered by the imam, and engage in communal remembrance of Allah. This collective gathering strengthens the bonds of the community, reminds believers of their shared responsibilities, and reinforces the values of justice, compassion, and piety. Even for those unable to attend in person, the spirit of the day encourages reflection, supplication, and devotion. Prophetic traditions highlight the unparalleled blessings of Friday. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that there is a special hour on Friday during which any sincere supplication will be granted. This moment is a spiritual opportunity that occurs weekly, offering believers a chance to seek forgiveness, guidance, and protection from Allah. Scholars have emphasized that the exact timing of this hour is unknown, encouraging Muslims to remain in consistent worship, reflection, and prayer throughout the day. This unpredictability fosters humility, vigilance, and a deeper sense of reliance on God, reminding believers that divine mercy cannot be confined to human schedules. Beyond the ritual of prayer, Friday is a day for contemplation and remembrance. The Quran itself encourages believers to engage in dhikr, the remembrance of Allah, and to reflect on His signs in creation. Fridays serve as a weekly checkpoint, a pause in the relentless pace of life, urging individuals to assess their spiritual, moral, and personal progress. It is a day to reconnect with the values of patience, sincerity, and gratitude. Every Friday, Muslims are reminded that life is fleeting, that worldly pursuits are temporary, and that the true success lies in spiritual devotion and ethical conduct. Friday also carries historical and eschatological significance. Islamic scholars note that it is the day on which Adam, the first human, was created, and the day he entered paradise. Similarly, it is believed that the Day of Judgment will occur on a Friday, linking the weekly observation to both the origins of humanity and the ultimate destiny of all creation. This dual significance transforms Friday into a day of profound reflection, connecting believers not only with the present moment, but also with the broader narrative of human existence and the divine plan. The weight of these connections encourages mindfulness, humility, and a conscious effort to live righteously. In addition to prayer and reflection, Friday is a day for seeking forgiveness and spiritual cleansing. Muslims are encouraged to make extra supplications, recite Quranic chapters, and engage in acts of charity. Prophet Muhammad emphasized the virtue of cleanliness on Fridays, urging believers to perform ghusl, the full ritual bath, wear clean clothes, and present themselves with dignity and respect. This external preparation complements the internal preparation of the heart, highlighting the holistic approach Islam takes toward worship. Body, mind, and soul must all be aligned in devotion to God. By observing these practices, Muslims demonstrate reverence for the sanctity of the day and cultivate a mindset of spiritual readiness and humility. Friday's spiritual importance is further reinforced through the Sunnah, the Prophet's guidance and practices. He encouraged reciting specific Quranic chapters, remembering Allah frequently, and engaging in sincere dua, or supplication. Among these recommended practices, one that stands out is the recitation of Surah Al-Kahf. While Friday itself is significant, the Prophet linked this chapter to the day, emphasizing its spiritual benefits, protection from trials, and illumination of the heart and mind. The weekly recitation of Surah Al-Kahf complements the broader purpose of Friday, to seek guidance, strengthen faith, and prepare for the challenges of life with patience and wisdom. The communal aspect of Friday cannot be overstated. Muslims around the world gather in mosques, forming a visible expression of unity and devotion. The collective recitation of prayers, the listening to sermons, and the shared atmosphere of reflection create a unique spiritual energy. Even beyond the mosque, families and communities often engage in discussions about faith, moral lessons, and personal development. Friday becomes a day when spirituality is experienced communally and individually, weaving together personal devotion with social responsibility. The Prophet encouraged that believers should encourage one another in righteousness, and Friday offers the perfect platform for this encouragement to flourish. Finally, Friday is a day of hope, mercy, and renewal. The weekly rhythm allows believers to pause, reorient themselves, and embrace the teachings of Islam with renewed energy. The special status of the day, the congregational prayers, the remembrance of Allah, and the connection to prophetic traditions all work together to create a spiritual sanctuary amidst the busyness of life. By observing Friday with intention, Muslims cultivate mindfulness, gratitude, and resilience,
equipping themselves to face both spiritual and worldly challenges. The day becomes a reminder that faith is not only practiced in isolation, but shared, reflected upon, and renewed continuously. In conclusion, Friday is far more than a weekly break. It is a sacred appointment with God. Jumu'ah carries layers of spiritual, historical, and communal significance, inviting Muslims to pause, pray, and reflect. It is a weekly reminder of human mortality, divine mercy, and the pursuit of righteousness. Through worship, reflection, and remembrance, believers reconnect with their Creator, purify their hearts, and seek protection from life's trials. The special hour, the congregational prayers, the teachings of the Prophet, and the overarching call to mindfulness make Friday a cornerstone of Islamic spirituality, a day when the heart is awakened, the soul is nourished, and faith is renewed for the week ahead.
In conclusion, Surah Al-Kahf is far more than a collection of stories. It is a comprehensive guide for navigating life's challenges with faith, patience, and divine awareness. The chapter teaches believers about the importance of steadfastness in adversity, humility in the face of divine wisdom, ethical leadership, and the transient nature of worldly life. It encourages reflection, supplication, and spiritual vigilance, offering practical and timeless guidance for Muslims across generations. Reciting it on Fridays, as the Prophet Muhammad advised, provides believers with protection, light, and insight, serving as a weekly reminder of Allah's mercy, guidance, and the ultimate purpose of human existence. By engaging deeply with its narratives and themes, Muslims cultivate a resilient, thoughtful, and faithful approach to life, rooted in the knowledge that divine wisdom governs all things and that patience, trust, and devotion are the keys to spiritual success. The practice of reciting Surah Al-Kahf every Friday is deeply rooted in the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who emphasized its spiritual significance and practical benefits for believers. The Prophet encouraged Muslims to engage with this chapter weekly, highlighting both its protective qualities and its role as a source of guidance and illumination. Multiple authentic hadiths document his instructions, demonstrating that the recitation of Surah Al-Kahf is not merely a recommendation, but a profound spiritual practice that strengthens faith, offers divine light, and serves as a shield against trials, particularly those of the Dajjal, the false messiah. Understanding these prophetic teachings provides insight into why this practice has endured for over 14 centuries and remains a cherished tradition among Muslims worldwide. One of the most cited hadiths on this topic comes from Abu Darda, may Allah be pleased with him, who reported that the Prophet Muhammad said, "Whoever recites Surah Al-Kahf on Friday, a light shall shine for him between this Friday and the next." Al-Hakim Mustadrak. This hadith emphasizes a unique form of spiritual illumination. The light mentioned is understood by scholars to signify guidance, clarity, and protection from moral and spiritual pitfalls. In essence, reciting Surah Al-Kahf weekly serves as a metaphorical beacon, guiding believers through the darkness of doubt, sin, and worldly distractions. This light helps Muslims maintain their focus on the path of righteousness, reinforcing the connection between weekly spiritual practice and ongoing personal development. Another hadith narrated by Al-Hakim and Ibn Hibban elaborates on the protective aspect of Surah Al-Kahf. The Prophet said, "Recite Surah Al-Kahf on the day of Jumu'ah, for it will protect you from the trial of the Dajjal." The Dajjal, often described in Islamic eschatology as a deceiving figure who will appear before the Day of Judgment, represents a monumental test of faith. By reciting Surah Al-Kahf, believers are spiritually fortified against deception, arrogance, and moral confusion. The chapter stories the steadfastness of the people of the cave, the wisdom of Musa and Khidr, and the justice of Dhul-Qarnayn serve as practical examples of resisting temptation, maintaining patience, and relying on Allah even when worldly circumstances appear overwhelming. The Prophet's guidance connects the recitation to both immediate spiritual benefits and long-term protection in the eschatological sense, demonstrating the multifaceted significance of this practice. In addition to protection and illumination, the Prophet emphasized the moral and ethical lessons embedded within Surah Al-Kahf. Reciting it weekly allows believers to internalize these lessons and apply them in daily life. For instance, the story of the people of the cave teaches that true faith requires courage to stand against societal pressures, even if it means isolating oneself temporarily from the surrounding community. By witnessing these examples of patience, resilience, and reliance on Allah, believers are reminded that worldly trials are temporary and divine reward is eternal. The Prophet's encouragement to recite the chapter every Friday ensures that these lessons are regularly reinforced, creating a consistent rhythm of reflection and moral growth. Moreover, the Prophet's teachings link the recitation of Surah Al-Kahf with a unique form of weekly spiritual renewal. Just as the day of Friday serves as a pause from worldly concerns, the recitation of this chapter provides mental clarity, moral reflection, and emotional balance. Scholars explain that this ritual is not intended as a mere mechanical repetition of words, but as a contemplative engagement with the Quran's meanings. By reflecting on the narratives and the wisdom they contain, believers cultivate humility, patience, and trust in Allah's plan. The weekly practice also fosters mindfulness,
reminding Muslims that spiritual nourishment is a continual process requiring intentional effort, rather than a sporadic act of devotion. The Prophet's emphasis on Surah Al-Kahf is also reflected in reports regarding its virtues in relation to divine reward. In one narration, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, may Allah be pleased with him, reported that the Prophet said, "Whoever memorizes 10 verses from the beginning of Surah Al-Kahf will be protected from the trial of the Dajjal." Sahih Muslim. This highlights not only the protective function of the chapter, but also the merit in memorization and deep engagement. Memorizing portions of the Quran strengthens the believer's spiritual foundation, allowing the messages to remain accessible in times of challenge or temptation. Even those who cannot memorize the entire chapter benefit from regular recitation and contemplation, ensuring that the light, guidance, and protection promised by the Prophet are accessible to all. Another critical aspect emphasized by the Prophet is the spiritual continuity achieved through weekly recitation. By maintaining a consistent schedule, Muslims cultivate discipline in worship and reflection. This practice establishes a connection between the individual and the broader Muslim community, as millions around the world engage with Surah Al-Kahf every Friday. This collective observance fosters a sense of unity, shared values, and communal reinforcement of faith. Scholars have noted that regular recitations on Fridays serves as a reminder that faith is an ongoing journey, not a one-time act, and that spiritual growth requires both consistency and mindfulness. The Prophet's guidance also highlights the balance between worldly life and spiritual vigilance. While humans are engaged in daily responsibilities, reciting Surah Al-Kahf every Friday serves as a weekly anchor, helping believers step back from routine concerns and reflect on the eternal truths conveyed by the Quran. The chapter's stories are rich with examples of patience, reliance on Allah, humility, and ethical decision-making. Engaging with these narratives encourage believers to navigate worldly challenges with wisdom and integrity, keeping faith at the center of their actions. The Prophet's advice ensures that Muslims do not merely read the chapter as an abstract text, but internalize its lessons, allowing them to influence character, choices, and behavior.
Finally, the prophetic teachings underscore the holistic nature of this practice. Reciting Surah Al-Kahf on Friday combines worship, reflection, moral instruction, and spiritual protection. It is a practice that addresses the mind, heart, and soul simultaneously, offering guidance, fortitude, and enlightenment. By emphasizing its recitation, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, provided a practical method for Muslims to maintain their spiritual health, strengthen their connection with Allah, and prepare for both worldly trials and eschatological tests. The enduring nature of this guidance, observed by Muslims for centuries, speaks to its timeless wisdom, universal relevance, and profound spiritual impact. In conclusion, the Prophet Muhammad's teachings on Friday recitation of Surah Al-Kahf illuminate the depth and breadth of Islamic spiritual practice. Through authentic hadiths, believers are instructed to recite this chapter weekly to gain light, protection, and divine guidance. The narratives within the chapter serve as models of steadfast faith, patience, humility, and moral integrity, reinforcing lessons that are essential for personal and communal growth. Reciting Surah Al-Kahf on Fridays is not merely a ritualistic act, but a conscious engagement with divine wisdom, offering spiritual clarity, resilience, and moral insight. It ensures that each believer's week begins with reflection, awareness, and a strengthened connection to Allah. By following the Prophet's guidance, Muslims continue to experience the profound benefits promised in the hadiths, allowing the light of Surah Al-Kahf to illuminate their lives, guide their actions, and safeguard their hearts until the following Friday. The story of the people of the cave, known in Arabic as Ashab al-Kahf, is one of the most profound narratives in Surah Al-Kahf and holds immense significance for Muslims across generations. These young believers lived during a time when faith in Allah was not only uncommon, but actively opposed by a society steeped in idolatry and tyranny. Their unwavering commitment to monotheism placed them in direct conflict with the ruling powers, who demanded conformity and worship of false deities. Faced with persecution, social pressure, and the threat of severe punishment, these youths made a courageous choice. They would remain steadfast in their faith and place their absolute trust in Allah, even if it meant abandoning their homes, families, and the familiar comforts of life. The narrative begins by illustrating the extreme conditions in which these believers lived. The society surrounding them had turned away from truth and justice, creating an environment in which practicing true faith was dangerous. Yet the people of the cave chose to reject compromise. Their decision to flee and seek refuge in a secluded cave demonstrates the first key lesson of this story: the courage to stand firm in belief, even when external circumstances are threatening. In doing so, they exemplified the principle that faith is not merely a private conviction, but a guiding force that must shape actions, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Upon entering the cave, the youth placed themselves entirely in the care of Allah. The Quran recounts that Allah caused them to sleep for many years,
protecting them from both the passage of time and the dangers of the world outside. This miraculous preservation is perhaps the most striking aspect of the story, highlighting Allah's absolute power, mercy, and ability to intervene on behalf of the faithful. Their extended slumber symbolizes divine protection and the idea that true faith invites God's assistance in ways that may surpass human comprehension. For believers today, this serves as a reminder that reliance on Allah is not passive. It is an active trust that manifests in both courage to act and patience to endure. The Quran describes how the cave itself became a sanctuary, shielding the youth from harm and preserving their physical and spiritual integrity. When they awoke, they were unaware of how much time had passed, demonstrating the timeless nature of Allah's care. This miraculous element underscores the broader symbolism of the story. God's protection is available to those who sincerely rely on Him, and divine support may arrive in ways that are unexpected, yet perfectly suited to the believer's circumstances. The story conveys a profound spiritual truth. In times of trial, patience and trust are essential, and the believer who remains steadfast in faith can experience God's guidance and preservation in remarkable ways. Another crucial lesson from the story is the youth's collective decision-making and unity. The Quran emphasizes that they did not act rashly or individually, rather they consulted one another and acted in concert, demonstrating wisdom and cohesion. This aspect of the narrative highlights the importance of community and counsel in maintaining faith under pressure. Even in isolation, believers are encouraged to seek guidance, discuss challenges, and support one another in upholding moral and spiritual principles. The people of the cave exemplify how collective action rooted in shared values can strengthen resolve and provide mutual encouragement when confronting adversity. The story also touches upon the theme of time and its fleeting nature. The youth awoke to discover that centuries had passed, yet Allah's plan had preserved them. This miraculous control over time serves as a reminder that worldly measures, years, wealth, status, are ultimately transient, whereas faith and reliance on Allah are enduring. The Quran uses this narrative to juxtapose the impermanence of worldly life with the eternal significance of divine guidance. For modern believers, the story encourages reflection on priorities, prompting individuals to focus on what holds eternal value rather than being absorbed in fleeting worldly pursuits. The people of the cave were not only physically protected, but also morally and spiritually preserved. Their steadfastness provides a model for resisting societal pressures and moral compromise. In an age when temptation, distraction, and spiritual challenges are ubiquitous, their story remains profoundly relevant. Muslims are reminded that integrity and faith require courage, and conscious choice, particularly when surrounding influences promote values that conflict with divine principles. By reflecting on the example of Al-Kahf, believers understand that protection and reward come not through avoidance of challenges, but through steadfast adherence to faith and reliance on Allah's guidance. Furthermore, the story emphasizes humility and recognition of divine power. The youth could not rely on their strength or intelligence alone. Their preservation was a direct result of Allah's intervention. This teaches a vital lesson for believers. Human effort, while important, must always be accompanied by reliance on God. True success in navigating trials arises from the combination of personal initiative, moral courage, and absolute trust in Allah's wisdom. The miraculous nature of the cave, the preservation of the youth, and the passage of centuries all serve to highlight the central role of divine providence in the lives of those who commit themselves to faith.
The Quran concludes the story with the youth emerging from the cave and re-entering the society that had once persecuted them, only to find that circumstances had changed dramatically. This resolution underscores another symbolic lesson. The believer's patience and steadfastness in faith may yield outcomes that surpass immediate understanding or expectation. The reward for steadfastness is not always apparent in the present, but Allah's wisdom ensures that the faithful are ultimately honored, guided, and protected. In this way, the story provides hope and encouragement for Muslims navigating trials, reinforcing the principle that perseverance and reliance on God lead to divine reward. The enduring impact of this story is reflected in the prophetic guidance regarding its recitation. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, encouraged believers to recite Surah Al-Kahf, which narrates this story, every Friday. He highlighted that doing so provides light for the week ahead, strengthens faith, and offers protection against moral and spiritual trials. The example of the people of the cave serves as both historical testimony and spiritual metaphor, illustrating the tangible benefits of faith, patience, and reliance on Allah in real and symbolic terms. In conclusion, the story of Ashab al-Kahf remains one of the most powerful and instructive narratives in the Quran. It teaches the importance of steadfast faith, reliance on God during trials, moral courage, and the transient nature of worldly life. Through their miraculous preservation, unity, and patience, the people of the cave exemplify the rewards of unwavering trust in God. Their story encourages believers to maintain integrity, resist societal pressures, and place their full reliance on divine guidance. By reciting Surah Al-Kahf and reflecting on this narrative, Muslims are reminded that true protection, light, and spiritual strength come from Allah alone, and that steadfast faith in the face of adversity is both a timeless and deeply relevant principle for every generation. The story of Prophet Musa, Moses, and Khidr, as narrated in Surah Al-Kahf, presents one of the most profound lessons on humility, patience, and the limits of human understanding when it comes to divine wisdom. This narrative begins with Prophet Musa, a prophet of immense knowledge and experience, being instructed by Allah to seek a servant endowed with unique wisdom. Musa, confident in his own knowledge and accustomed to guiding his people, embarks on this journey expecting clarity, insight, and guidance. However, what unfolds is a remarkable lesson in the nature of God's wisdom, the importance of patience, and the necessity of humility in the pursuit of understanding. Prophet Musa's encounter with Khidr begins with a simple request, to follow him and learn from his knowledge. Khidr, however, warns Musa that he will not have the patience to comprehend his actions fully. This sets the stage for the first key lesson. Human knowledge, even that of a prophet, has limitations when compared to Allah's infinite wisdom. Despite his stature as a messenger, Musa is reminded that divine guidance often transcends conventional understanding. This teaches believers that humility is essential, even for those who possess great knowledge, accomplishments, or spiritual insight. True wisdom begins with recognizing one's limitations and trusting in God's plan. As they journey together, Khidr performs several actions that seem perplexing or even troubling to Musa. First, he damages a boat belonging to poor fishermen. To Musa, this act appears unjust and unnecessary, yet Khidr explains that his action was intended to protect the boat from seizure by a tyrannical ruler. Second, Khidr kills a young boy, an act that shocks Musa and seems contrary to the moral guidance he has always imparted. Finally, Khidr repairs a crumbling wall in a town whose people had been inhospitable, without asking for compensation. In each instance, Musa struggles to reconcile these actions with his understanding of justice, morality, and ethical behavior. These events underscore the second lesson. Patience is essential when confronting circumstances that appear confusing or contrary to expectation. Human perception is limited, and immediate judgment may fail to recognize the broader, divinely ordained purpose. The story emphasizes the principle that divine wisdom often operates in ways that are hidden or indirect. While Musa witnesses events that seem inexplicable, Khidr later explains the reasoning behind each act. The damaged boat was a preventative measure to save the fishermen from an unjust ruler. The boy's death prevented future corruption and spiritual harm. The repaired wall concealed treasure for orphans in a town unwilling to offer in hospitality. Each revelation illustrates the subtlety of God's plan, demonstrating that outcomes which initially appear harmful or confusing may ultimately serve justice, protection, and the greater good. This narrative encourages believers to adopt a long-term perspective, trusting that Allah's wisdom governs all events even when immediate understanding is beyond human capacity. For contemporary Muslims, the lessons from Musa and Khidr hold profound relevance. In daily life, individuals frequently encounter situations that challenge their understanding of fairness, morality, and personal hardship. They may witness injustice, experience personal loss, or struggle to comprehend events that appear inexplicable. Like Musa, it is human to question, feel doubt, or seek explanation. However, the story teaches that true faith requires patience, trust in God, and recognition that ultimate wisdom is divine, not human. By practicing humility and patience, believers cultivate resilience and maintain spiritual equilibrium even when life circumstances seem bewildering or unfair. Another essential lesson in the story is the balance between inquiry and submission. Musa asks questions and seeks explanation, demonstrating that curiosity and the pursuit of understanding are valued in Islam. Yet he is cautioned to recognize the limits of human reasoning in relation to divine intent. This balance is critical for believers navigating complex moral and spiritual challenges. Islam encourages thoughtful reflection, seeking knowledge, and striving for understanding, but it also emphasizes submission to God's wisdom when human comprehension falls short. This way, the story models an ideal approach to faith, a combination of active engagement, reflection, and humble trust. The narrative also highlights the importance of discernment and awareness of unseen factors in life. Many of Khidr's actions are initially hidden in meaning. Only through explanation does Musa grasp their purpose. Similarly, in everyday life, believers may encounter situations that defy immediate understanding. Challenges may arise in personal relationships, career decisions, or social interactions that appear unjust or incomprehensible. The story encourages Muslims to approach these situations with patience, reflection, and reliance on God, acknowledging that the unseen factors influencing outcomes are often part of a broader divine design. This perspective fosters emotional resilience, spiritual clarity, and moral composure. A further lesson from the story involves the notion of moral responsibility and ethical decision-making. Khidr's actions, though initially perplexing, are guided by divine knowledge and purpose. For believers, this teaches that ethical choices require consideration, awareness, and humility. While humans are responsible for their decisions, they must also recognize the limitations of their knowledge. Faith involves seeking guidance, reflecting on principles, and aligning actions with the ethical and moral framework provided by Allah.
This principle is particularly relevant when confronting ethical dilemmas, where immediate outcomes may appear uncertain or contradictory. Believers are encouraged to act with integrity, patience, and trust that Allah will guide the consequences toward justice and mercy.
The story of Musa and Khidr also emphasizes the virtue of patience as a spiritual discipline. Musa's journey is not instantaneous. It requires travel, observation, and endurance. Each episode of apparent confusion tests his ability to remain composed, seek understanding, and trust in God's wisdom. Similarly, believers in everyday life are tested through challenges, uncertainty, and hardship. Patience, or sabr, is a recurring theme in the Quran and prophetic teachings, representing both resilience and trust in divine timing. By internalizing this lesson, Muslims learn to approach trials not with frustration or despair, but with reflection, perseverance, and faith in Allah's ultimate plan. Finally, the story demonstrates the interconnectedness of faith, knowledge, and divine guidance. Musa, despite his prophetic knowledge, is instructed to learn from Khidr, whose insight stems from direct divine wisdom. This highlights that human achievement, intellect, or spiritual stature alone is insufficient without guidance from Allah. Believers are reminded that humility, openness to learning, and reliance on divine wisdom are essential components of spiritual growth. The story encourages Muslims to seek knowledge, reflect deeply, and cultivate patience, recognizing that divine guidance permeates both extraordinary events and everyday experiences. In conclusion, the story of Prophet Musa and Khidr in Surah Al-Kahf provides timeless lessons for believers. It emphasizes humility, teaching that even the most knowledgeable individuals must acknowledge the limits of human understanding in the face of divine wisdom. It underscores patience, showing that apparent injustice, confusion, or difficulty may conceal a greater purpose orchestrated by Allah. It demonstrates the necessity of trusting in God's guidance, reflecting on unseen factors, and maintaining moral integrity amid uncertainty. By connecting this narrative to everyday challenges, Muslims are reminded that faith is not merely theoretical, but practical. It requires humility, patience, discernment, and reliance on Allah in every aspect of life. Reciting Surah Al-Kahf, reflecting on the lessons of Musa and Khidr, and internalizing their wisdom, equips believers with the tools to navigate both spiritual and worldly challenges, offering clarity, strength, and divine light in an often unpredictable world. The story of Dhul Qarnayn, as recounted in Surah Al-Kahf, is a powerful narrative that highlights justice, leadership, and the responsible use of power. Dhul Qarnayn, whose name is often interpreted to mean the two-horned one, was a righteous and divinely guided ruler who traveled across vast lands to uphold justice and protect communities from oppression. Unlike ordinary leaders, Dhul Qarnayn is portrayed as a figure who combined worldly authority with spiritual responsibility, understanding that all power and authority are ultimately granted by Allah. His story serves as both a historical lesson and a timeless moral guide, illustrating how leadership should be exercised in accordance with divine principles. The narrative begins with Dhul Qarnayn's journey to the west. During this expedition, he encounters a community in need, facing hardship and vulnerability. The people appeal to him for assistance, seeking protection from the chaos and injustice that threaten their lives. Rather than exploiting his power for personal gain, Dhul Qarnayn listens attentively and evaluates their situation. His approach demonstrates the first key lesson of the story. Justice in leadership requires careful observation, discernment, and an ethical assessment of the needs of those under one's authority. Leaders are called not to act impulsively or selfishly, but to align decisions with principles of fairness, compassion, and responsibility. As the story progresses, Dhul Qarnayn travels to the east and encounters new societies and challenges. Each encounter is an opportunity to exercise wisdom, patience, and ethical judgment. The Quran emphasizes that he used his strength and resources to serve others, not to dominate or oppress. This aspect of his character underscores a central principle in Islamic governance. Power is a trust from Allah, and rulers are accountable for how they wield it. The story of Dhul Qarnayn teaches that leadership is inseparable from moral responsibility. Those entrusted with authority must prioritize justice, uphold the rights of the oppressed, and safeguard the well-being of communities. One of the most famous episodes in Dhul Qarnayn's story is his journey to the land of Gog and Magog, two peoples described as corrupt and destructive. These communities threaten surrounding populations through their mischief and aggression. Dhul Qarnayn, guided by Allah, constructs a strong barrier to contain their harmful influence. This act is emblematic of wise and proactive leadership. It demonstrates foresight, strategic planning, and ethical intervention to protect society.
The barrier was not an act of domination or vengeance. Rather, it was a preventative measure designed to preserve peace, security, and justice. Through this example, the story conveys that effective leadership requires not only the ability to respond to immediate crises, but also the foresight to mitigate potential harm before it escalates. The Quran also emphasizes the moral accountability of Dhul Qarnayn. Throughout his journeys, he remains conscious that all power comes from Allah and that he is ultimately answerable for his actions. This awareness ensures that his authority is exercised with humility, integrity, and a commitment to ethical principles. For believers today, this aspect of the narrative serves as a reminder that human leadership, whether in governance, family, or community, carries an inherent responsibility. Individuals in positions of authority must recognize the limits of their power, consider the consequences of their decisions, and remain mindful of the moral and spiritual dimensions of their actions. Beyond the political and social lessons, the story of Dhul Qarnayn also carries profound spiritual and ethical teachings. His journey symbolized the challenges and responsibilities that come with worldly influence, illustrating that true success lies in the alignment of power with justice, compassion, and divine guidance. The Quran emphasizes that material strength or authority alone is insufficient. It must be guided by moral principles and the fear of Allah. In this way, Dhul Qarnayn's example serves as a template for ethical conduct, demonstrating that every individual, regardless of status, is accountable for using their talents, resources, and influence responsibly. The narrative further emphasizes the importance of balance in leadership. Dhul Qarnayn does not oppress the weak nor show favoritism to the powerful. Instead, he acts with impartiality, fairness, and a commitment to the common good. His example illustrates that true justice requires objectivity, empathy, and moral courage. Leaders and believers alike are called to uphold fairness in all areas of life, whether in personal relationships, professional responsibilities, or broader societal roles. By adhering to principles of justice and accountability, individuals contribute to a society that reflects divine guidance, harmony, and ethical integrity.
Another essential lesson from Dhul Qarnayn's story is the integration of knowledge and action. He does not merely possess physical strength or authority. He applies wisdom, foresight, and strategic thinking to each situation. His actions are deliberate, calculated, and morally informed, demonstrating that effective leadership requires both understanding and execution. This principle extends to the personal lives of believers as well. Making ethical choices in daily life, whether in managing personal resources, resolving conflicts, or guiding others, requires a combination of knowledge, reflection, and responsible action. Dhul Qarnayn's example shows that true leadership, whether on a grand or individual scale, is defined not by power alone, but by the consistent application of wisdom, justice, and ethical responsibility. The story also conveys the interconnectedness of human responsibility and divine guidance. Dhul Qarnayn succeeds not merely because of his strength or intelligence, but because he remains guided by Allah in every decision. This underscores the broader lesson for believers. Moral and spiritual discernment is inseparable from faith. Success, justice, and ethical integrity are achieved when individuals align their actions with divine principles, seek guidance in decision-making, and remain conscious of their accountability before Allah. Dhul Qarnayn's journey, therefore, serves as both an inspirational narrative and a practical framework for ethical living. Finally, the story of Dhul Qarnayn encourages believers to reflect on the transient nature of worldly power and the eternal consequences of moral actions. His leadership is framed within the context of service to humanity and devotion to God. By prioritizing justice, compassion, and ethical responsibility, Dhul Qarnayn demonstrates that power is not an end in itself, but a means to achieve higher moral and spiritual objectives. The Quran uses his example to remind believers that all achievements, authority, and material resources are temporary, and that ultimate accountability rests with Allah. This principle motivates individuals to exercise their influence with integrity, foresight, and a deep sense of responsibility. In conclusion, the story of Dhul Qarnayn in Surah Al-Kahf presents enduring lessons for leaders, believers, and anyone entrusted with power or responsibility. It emphasizes justice, ethical leadership, and the responsible use of God-given authority. The narrative highlights the importance of foresight, moral accountability, and alignment with divine guidance, demonstrating that true success is measured by the welfare of others, fairness in action, and faithfulness to ethical principles. By reflecting on Dhul Qarnayn's example, Muslims are encouraged to cultivate integrity, wisdom, and responsibility in all aspects of life. His story reminds believers that leadership, influence, and personal agency are not mere privileges, but sacred trusts, and that moral behavior, accountability, and the pursuit of justice are inseparable from a life guided by faith in Allah. Reciting Surah Al-Kahf on Friday is a practice strongly encouraged by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and holds profound spiritual significance for Muslims. The Quran itself contains stories, lessons, and guidance that illuminate the path of faith, patience, and reliance on Allah, and the Prophet specifically linked the recitation of this chapter to the blessings of Friday.
By engaging with Surah Al-Kahf weekly, believers are not merely performing an act of ritual devotion, they are actively connecting with divine guidance, receiving spiritual illumination, and reinforcing their resilience against moral and spiritual challenges. This chapter, often referred to as a source of light, protection, and insight, provides a spiritual anchor for Muslims in an unpredictable world. One of the foremost benefits highlighted by the Prophet is that reciting Surah Al-Kahf on Friday brings a unique light or spiritual illumination that lasts until the following Friday. The Prophet said, "Whoever recites Surah Al-Kahf on Friday, a light shall shine for him between this Friday and the next." Al-Hakim, Mustadrak. Scholars interpret this light as a metaphorical illumination that guides the believer in moral, ethical, and spiritual matters. It serves as a form of clarity amidst confusion, allowing the individual to navigate daily challenges with heightened awareness and wisdom. The spiritual light is not merely symbolic, it represents the tangible benefit of connecting deeply with the Quran's guidance, internalizing its lessons, and applying them to both mundane and extraordinary aspects of life. Another significant benefit is protection from trials, particularly the fitna of Dajjal, the false messiah who will appear before the Day of Judgment. The Quran does not explicitly mention Dajjal, but prophetic traditions emphasize his role as a severe test of faith, capable of deceiving many. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, advised, "Recite Surah Al-Kahf on the day of Jumu'ah, for it will protect you from the trial of Dajjal." Al-Hakim, Mustadrak. The chapter's narratives, including the steadfastness of the people of the cave, the wisdom of Musa and Khidr, and the justice of Dhul-Qarnayn, offer practical guidance on resisting deception, maintaining moral clarity, and trusting in Allah during moments of confusion or moral ambiguity. In this way, Surah Al-Kahf functions as a spiritual shield, fortifying believers against both visible and unseen trials. The stories within the chapter exemplify resilience and steadfastness, qualities that are essential for navigating life's challenges. The people of the cave demonstrate unwavering faith persecution. Musa and Khidr reveal the necessity of patience and humility when faced with events beyond human understanding, and Dhul-Qarnayn illustrates the responsible exercise of power guided by ethical principles. By reciting and reflecting on these stories every Friday, believers are reminded that trials are not mere obstacles, but opportunities to strengthen faith and reliance on Allah. The Quran presents these narratives as living lessons, ensuring that the recitation of Surah Al-Kahf actively contributes to spiritual growth and moral fortitude. Weekly recitation of Surah Al-Kahf also functions as a spiritual reset. Much like Friday itself provides a pause from worldly routines, the chapter allows Muslims to realign their hearts, minds, and actions with the principles of faith. Engaging with its verses encourages reflection on moral and ethical responsibilities, reinforces trust in Allah's guidance, and renews the believer's commitment to righteousness. In a world filled with distraction, temptation, and moral uncertainty, this weekly practice offers a structured opportunity for spiritual renewal. It is a reminder that faith is not static. It requires regular engagement, reflection, and conscious effort to remain vibrant and resilient.
The recitation also promotes mindfulness, encouraging believers to actively contemplate divine wisdom rather than merely repeating words. The Quran's narratives are rich with ethical, spiritual, and practical lessons that challenge the reader to think critically about life, morality, and personal conduct. By contemplating these lessons, Muslims cultivate insight, discernment, and a heightened awareness of the consequences of their actions. This process of reflection transforms Surah Al-Kahf from a recited text into a dynamic source of guidance, shaping character, influencing decisions, and fostering a deeper connection with Allah. Additionally, the chapter's recitation reinforces the believer's awareness of life's transient nature. The people of the cave, for instance, slept for centuries, yet were preserved by Allah, symbolizing the contrast between the temporal world and eternal divine wisdom. Musa's journey with Khidr demonstrates the limits of human perception, teaching that true understanding and success are rooted in reliance on God. Dhul-Qarnayn's leadership emphasizes the ethical use of resources and authority. Together, these stories remind Muslims that worldly achievements are temporary, whereas moral integrity, faith, and reliance on Allah hold eternal significance. Reciting Surah Al-Kahf weekly embeds these lessons into the believer's consciousness, shaping both mindset and behavior. The practice also fosters hope, reassurance, and confidence in divine protection. By engaging with Surah Al-Kahf, believers internalize the understanding that Allah is aware of their struggles, attentive to their faith, and capable of intervening in ways beyond human comprehension. This spiritual confidence empowers Muslims to face challenges with resilience, ethical consistency, and patience. The weekly recitation thus serves not only as a ritual, but as a source of ongoing emotional and spiritual support, reminding believers that they are never alone in their trials, and that divine guidance is always available to those who sincerely seek it. Moreover, the recitation of Surah Al-Kahf strengthens the rhythm of worship in the believer's life. Just as Friday itself is a designated day for reflection, prayer, and communal engagement, the chapter provides a structured opportunity for individual spiritual practice. Consistent weekly engagement builds discipline, reinforces memory of Quranic teachings, and cultivates a habit of reflection and moral consideration. Over time, this regular practice helps believers integrate the lessons of the chapter into daily life, influencing behavior, decision-making, and interpersonal interactions in ways aligned with faith.
Finally, the Prophet Muhammad's peace be upon him guidance regarding Surah Al-Kahf highlights its role as a source of spiritual continuity. By encouraging recitation every Friday, the Prophet created a weekly spiritual anchor for believers. This repetition ensures that the teachings of the Quran are continually reinforced, that the moral and spiritual lessons are internalized, and that believers maintain a consistent connection to divine guidance. The chapter becomes a bridge between faith and action, reflection and practice, present life and eternal accountability. Its recitation encourages Muslims to approach each week with renewed moral focus, spiritual clarity, and awareness of God's mercy and guidance. In conclusion, reciting Surah Al-Kahf on Friday provides multiple spiritual benefits that encompass illumination, protection, guidance, moral reflection, and spiritual renewal. It offers light for the week ahead, guiding believers through challenges with clarity and discernment. It serves as a shield against trials, particularly the fitna of Dajjal, reinforcing moral vigilance and reliance on Allah. The weekly recitation functions as a spiritual reset, encouraging reflection, patience, humility, and steadfastness in faith. By internalizing the chapter's narratives and lessons, believers are reminded of the transient nature of life, the importance of ethical conduct, and the enduring power of divine guidance, making it an essential practice for every Muslim. As we reach the conclusion of our exploration of Surah Al-Kahf, it is essential to pause and reflect on the profound lessons that this chapter offers to every believer. Surah Al-Kahf, the 18th chapter of the Quran, is not merely a collection of historical narratives and divine instruction. It is a living guide, illuminating the path of faith, morality, and spiritual resilience. The stories of the people of the cave, Prophet Musa and Khidr, and Zulkarnain, together with the chapter's overarching themes, provide enduring lessons that remain profoundly relevant in the contemporary life of a Muslim. Through consistent engagement with these narratives, believers are reminded that faith is not a static concept, but a dynamic force that must be nurtured, reflected upon, and applied in daily life. The first and most critical call to action is the encouragement of consistent weekly recitation. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, emphasized the significance of reciting Surah Al-Kahf every Friday, promising light, guidance, and protection for the believer throughout the week. This practice is not merely a ritualistic repetition of words, it is a conscious engagement with divine guidance. Each recitation offers a moment of reflection, a chance to pause from worldly distractions, and an opportunity to realign the heart, mind, and soul with Allah's wisdom. By making the recitation of Surah Al-Kahf a consistent weekly habit, believers create a spiritual anchor that provides stability, moral clarity, and a source of divine support in the face of challenges. The stories contained within the chapter offer multiple layers of guidance that can transform both personal character and moral conduct. The people of the cave exemplify unwavering faith and patience during trials. Their decision to seek refuge in Allah's protection, despite the dangers and persecution they faced, teaches believers the importance of relying on God when circumstances seem beyond control. This narrative reminds Muslims that true faith requires courage, perseverance, and a willingness to stand firm against societal pressures and injustice. Their miraculous preservation underscores the reality that divine support accompanies those who maintain steadfast trust in God, and it provides hope and inspiration for believers navigating their own challenges in modern life.
Similarly, the story of Prophet Musa and Khidr demonstrates the virtues of humility, patience, and the recognition of divine wisdom beyond human perception. Musa, despite being a prophet, learns that knowledge alone is insufficient without trust in God's plan and patience in the face of uncertainty. Khidr's actions, initially confusing and seemingly unjust, ultimately reveal a greater divine purpose. For contemporary believers, this story is a reminder that life's trials, uncertainties, and even apparent injustices may conceal lessons or divine wisdom that is not immediately evident. By reflecting on this narrative, Muslims are encouraged to cultivate patience, humility, and a perspective that acknowledges the limitations of human understanding while fully trusting in Allah's guidance. The narrative of Dhul-Qarnayn, on the other hand, emphasizes justice, ethical leadership, and moral accountability. Dhul-Qarnayn's journeys across distant lands, his decisions to protect vulnerable communities, and his careful use of power exemplify the principles of righteous authority and responsible leadership. For believers today, his story serves as a blueprint for personal and societal conduct, illustrating that authority, resources, and influence are not ends in themselves, but tools to be employed ethically and in accordance with divine guidance. It also emphasizes the universal principle that true accountability rests with Allah, and that moral and spiritual integrity should guide every decision, whether in leadership, community engagement, or personal life. Beyond individual narratives, the recitation of Surah Al-Kahf every Friday serves as a spiritual reset. Just as Friday is a day of reflection, prayer, and communal gathering, the chapter provides an opportunity for believers to renew their spiritual commitment. The Quran's verses act as a weekly reminder of life's transient nature, the importance of patience, and the centrality of reliance on Allah.
In the face of life's distractions, uncertainties, and challenges, the act of recitation brings focus, clarity, and a sense of spiritual alignment. It reminds believers that faith is active, requiring reflection, engagement, and intentionality, rather than being a passive or occasional pursuit. Reciting Surah Al-Kahf also fosters a heightened awareness of the unseen realities that govern life and the moral universe. From the miraculous preservation of the people of the cave, to Khidr's divinely guided actions, and Dhul-Qarnayn's strategic interventions, the chapter demonstrates that divine wisdom and justice often operate beyond human perception. By engaging with these stories weekly, believers cultivate a mindset attuned to ethical discernment, patience, and moral reflection. This awareness enables Muslims to approach challenges with a deeper understanding, to exercise ethical judgment even under pressure, and to navigate life with a heightened sense of spiritual responsibility. Another profound benefit of consistent engagement with Surah Al-Kahf is the cultivation of spiritual resilience and protection. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, specifically connected the recitation of this chapter to protection against the trials of Dajjal, a test of faith in the eschatological narrative. While the fitna of Dajjal represents a metaphysical trial, the principle extends to all forms of spiritual and moral testing. Regular recitation strengthens the believer's heart, reinforces ethical steadfastness, and equips individuals with the spiritual fortitude to resist deception, moral compromise, and societal pressures. In essence, Surah Al-Kahf functions as both a guide and a shield, illuminating the path and providing protection from spiritual hazards that might otherwise undermine faith. The weekly recitation also emphasizes the integration of reflection, action, and moral consciousness. Each story, verse, and lesson invites believers not only to read or memorize, but to contemplate, internalize, and implement the teachings in daily life. It encourages Muslims to act with integrity, exercise patience, and rely on Allah's guidance while remaining conscious of their moral and spiritual responsibilities. In doing so, the recitation bridges the gap between understanding and practice, ensuring that faith is expressed not only in words but in ethical conduct, decision-making, and everyday choices. Finally, the conclusion of this reflection invites every believer to consider the broader, timeless message of Surah Al-Kahf, that faith is both a personal and communal journey, one that requires patience, humility, reflection, and consistent engagement with divine guidance. By making the recitation of this chapter a weekly habit, believers establish a rhythm of spiritual mindfulness, moral reflection, and conscious alignment with Allah's will. It becomes a source of illumination, protection, and renewal, equipping Muslims to face life's challenges with clarity, resilience, and ethical integrity. In summary, the call to action is clear. Every believer is encouraged to recite Surah Al-Kahf on Friday consistently, to reflect deeply on its narratives, and to internalize the lessons embedded within each story. From the people of the cave to Prophet Musa and Khidr to Dhul-Qarnayn, the chapter provides models of faith, patience, humility, ethical responsibility, and divine reliance. Engaging with Surah Al-Kahf weekly, ensuring that believers remain spiritually grounded, morally vigilant, and conscious of the eternal significance of their choices. It is both a practice and a reminder that faith must be lived, reflected upon, and renewed continuously. By acting on this guidance, Muslims cultivate a resilient heart, a clear moral compass, and an enduring connection with Allah, ensuring that the light of Surah Al-Kahf illuminates their path until the next Friday and beyond.